I thought I knew betrayal, but nothing could have prepared me for this, a secret so devastating it came from the two people I trusted most. My wife and my best friend weren't just lying to me, they were tearing my entire life apart behind my back. I've been sitting here for what feels like an eternity, staring at this screen, wondering how my life has reached this point. Not long ago, I believed my marriage was unshakable. 10 years together, 6 of those as husband and wife, and I thought we had one of those rock-solid relationships people admire. The kind where folks would say, now, there's a couple meant to be. That was me and Laura, or at least, that's what I thought. If someone had told me a year ago I'd be sitting here questioning everything, I'd have laughed it off. Laura is brilliant, beautiful, and unstoppable in her career. She's a project manager at a fast-paced tech firm, always busy, always climbing higher. I respected her for it, and honestly, I still do. But over the past few months, things have felt different. It's hard to pinpoint exactly what changed, but there's been a heaviness in the air between us, like an unspoken tension neither of us dares to acknowledge. At first, I chalked it up to her work. Laura's job is demanding, and I assumed the pressure was getting to her. It made sense, everyone has their tough seasons. I convinced myself it was just that, a phase. Still, I couldn't ignore this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Little things started standing out. She was suddenly inseparable from her phone, always clutching it tightly or leaving it face down on the table. She began dressing differently, sharper, more put together, even when we were just relaxing around the house on weekends. Then there were the unexpected work trips, popping up more frequently than ever. I've never been the type to get jealous. Trust has always been a cornerstone of our relationship. And I wanted to trust her. I really did. But here's the tricky thing about trust, once it starts to crack, everything can feel like evidence that something's wrong. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous. This was Laura, the woman who stood by me through thick and thin. She wasn't the kind of person who would betray me. She wouldn't. At least, that's what I wanted to believe. Then, a couple of months ago, things took a turn for the stranger. Laura began coming home later and later, with an endless stream of reasons, working overtime, urgent meetings, last-minute help for a colleague. I tried not to let it eat at me, but as these late nights piled up, so did my unease. Something just didn't sit right. One evening, over dinner, I decided to bring it up, trying to sound as casual as possible. "You've been working long hours lately," I said, keeping my tone light. "Is everything okay at work?" She barely glanced up from her plate. "Yeah, just busy," she replied quickly. "We've got a big project launch coming up, and the deadlines are insane." I nodded, forcing myself not to push further. But it wasn't just her busy schedule that bothered me. It was how distant she had become. We might have been sharing the same space, but it felt like she was living in a different world entirely. Our once deep conversations had withered into shallow exchanges, small talk with no real substance. And even when she was sitting right next to me, I found myself missing her. One night, as we were watching Netflix on the couch, her phone buzzed with a message. She glanced at it quickly, then flipped it over, face down, on the coffee table. My heart sank. It was such a small thing, but it felt monumental. Why hide it? What was there to keep from me? I wanted to ask her right then and there. I should have. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stayed silent, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. Love does that to you, doesn't it? It makes you second-guess your instincts, blinds you to the warning signs, even when they're staring you in the face. A few days later, I made an effort to bring us back to how things used to be. I suggested a date night, just the two of us, like old times. Laura gave me that familiar smile, the one that had swept me off my feet years ago, and agreed. For a moment, I let myself believe that I was just overthinking, that maybe everything would go back to normal. But when the night arrived, she backed out at the last minute. She said she needed to meet a friend instead. It was always something. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out if I was being irrational or if my marriage was slipping through my fingers. A troubling thought crept into my mind: was there someone else? Not long after that restless night, I started noticing patterns that were impossible to ignore. Her phone, for instance. Laura used to leave it lying around carelessly, on the counter, in the bathroom, anywhere. But now, it was always with her, like an extension of her. She'd text late into the night and even step out of the room if I came in. It was subtle at first, but the change was undeniable. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe she really was swamped with work, like she kept saying. Maybe I was being paranoid. But the unease sat like a knot in my stomach, tightening every day. One weekend, I tried suggesting something different. How about we go up to the cabin? Just the two of us. Take a break, escape for a couple of days. What do you think? I asked, hopeful. She paused, just for a second, but it was enough for me to feel the hesitation. I can't, Mike. There's too much going on at work. Maybe some other time, she replied. It was becoming a pattern. Every time I tried to reconnect, she'd find a way to pull back. I couldn't figure out what to do with that. Was it me? Had she grown tired of us, of this life we'd built together? Then, things took another strange turn, involving our closest friends, specifically Jack and Mia. Jack has been my best friend since college. He's the guy who's been there through everything: late-night parties, career changes, heartbreaks, you name it. Mia, his wife, is the sweetest person you'll ever meet. She's the kind of person who can't seem to find a bad thing to say about anyone. We'd all spent years hanging out, double dates, holidays, barbecues. But recently, Laura had been acting strange about seeing them. She'd come up with reasons not to join, or, if she did come, she'd seem distant, distracted, not her usual self. At first, I didn't think too much of it. But then, one evening after dinner, Jack pulled me aside. He looked uncomfortable, hesitant, like there was something weighing on him that he wasn't sure he should say. "Hey, is everything okay with you and Laura?" he asked, his voice low. I frowned, caught off guard. "Yeah, why do you ask?" He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know, man. You guys just seem a little off lately." Mia said Laura seemed stressed or something. I forced a laugh, trying to brush it off. "Yeah, it's just work. She's been buried under deadlines." But that conversation stuck with me. If Jack and Mia were noticing something, maybe I wasn't imagining it. Maybe the tension between us was as obvious to others as it was to me. Still, the idea that Laura might be keeping something significant from me felt surreal. This was my wife, the woman I'd planned my future with, the person I thought I knew better than anyone. We were supposed to be solid, a team, unshakable. But now, when I looked at her, I wasn't sure what I saw anymore. After that talk with Jack, something shifted inside me. It was like a switch flipped, and suddenly, I couldn't ignore the creeping feeling that my life, the life I'd built with Laura, was slipping away. I started watching her more closely, analyzing every little thing she did. Her words, her body language, even the way she avoided eye contact sometimes. It felt wrong, like I was violating some invisible rule of trust, but I couldn't stop. I needed to understand what was happening, even though I wasn't sure what I was looking for. One Friday night, Laura came home late again. I was sitting in the living room, flipping through TV channels, but I wasn't really watching. I was just waiting. She walked in close to midnight, and the moment I saw her, my chest tightened. She looked different, her hair neatly styled, makeup flawless, and wearing a dress I didn't recognize. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice calm, even though my stomach was churning. "Late night?" She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, long day. I'm exhausted. And that was it. No explanation, no details, just tired. She leaned down, kissed my forehead lightly, and headed straight to the bathroom. Soon, the sound of the shower filled the house, but all I could focus on was the silence lingering between us. Her phone was on the coffee table, left there for the first time in weeks. My pulse quickened. I wasn't the kind of person who went through their partner's phone, but there it was, sitting in front of me like a window into the truth I was terrified to see. I hesitated, my hands trembling. What if I found something? Worse, what if I didn't? And then it happened. The screen lit up with a new message, the name B displayed at the top. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Who the hell was B? The preview of the message was enough to stop my breath. Tonight was perfect. Can't wait for next time. My stomach dropped like I was free-falling. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I'd just seen. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe B was a friend, a colleague, someone harmless. But the words, the timing, told a different story. I sat there, staring at her phone, paralyzed. She was still in the shower, oblivious to the bombshell waiting in plain sight. I thought about barging in, confronting her right then and there. But instead, I froze. My body refused to move, caught somewhere between rage and disbelief. I turned off the TV, left the phone untouched, and went to bed. As I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, all I could think about was B and what the hell perfect was supposed to mean. I heard her moving around in the bathroom, going through her usual routine like nothing had changed. But for me, everything was different. I couldn't bring myself to ask her about it that night. I wasn't ready to face whatever truth might come out. The next few days were pure torture. That message replayed in my mind over and over, like some cruel reminder of what I might lose. Every time I looked at Laura, my stomach twisted into knots. I wanted answers, but I couldn't seem to find the words. What if I was wrong? What if I was right? Instead of confronting her, I watched her even more closely. Every time she picked up her phone, left the house, or gave me one of those smiles that didn't feel quite real, I wondered what was going on behind the scenes. It was driving me crazy. A few nights later, we sat down for dinner. The silence between us was deafening. Usually, we'd chat about our day or share a laugh about something random, but now it felt like we were just two people occupying the same space. I stared at her, searching for the Laura I used to know, the one who felt like home. How had I missed the signs? Had she always been this distant, and I just didn't see it? You're quiet tonight, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. She glanced up at me, her expression unreadable. I shrugged, keeping my tone as even as I could. Just tired. She smiled faintly, and for the first time, that smile felt like a mask. Yeah, me too. It was in that moment I realized I couldn't keep living in this limbo. Pretending everything was fine wasn't going to work anymore. I needed answers, no matter how much they might hurt. After dinner, Laura announced she was heading out to meet a friend. It was the third time this week, another vague plan with no real explanation. I watched her as she got ready, fixing her hair, carefully applying lipstick, and choosing an outfit that seemed too polished for a casual meetup. The moment she walked out the door, I grabbed my jacket and keys. I didn't have a plan or any idea what I was going to do. All I knew was that I couldn't keep sitting there, drowning in my thoughts. I needed answers, needed to know if what I feared was real. I drove aimlessly at first, the sound of the engine doing little to quiet the storm in my mind. A part of me begged for the possibility that I was overthinking, that my suspicions were baseless. But then, the memory of that text from B came rushing back, stoking the fire of doubt and anger inside me. Before I realized it, I was parked outside Jack and Mia's house. I hadn't planned on going there, but Jack was my best friend. He'd been my sounding board for years, the guy I could turn to no matter what. If anyone could help me make sense of this, it was him. I knocked on the door, trying to keep my composure. Jack answered, his face lighting up in surprise. "Mike? What's going on? Everything okay?" I stepped inside, unable to stop the words from spilling out. "I think Laura's cheating on me." His expression shifted instantly. The color drained from his face, and for a moment, he just stared at me, as if he didn't know what to say. "What? Why would you think that?" I laid it all out for him, the late nights, the strange behavior, and finally, the message from B. As I spoke, I noticed his face tighten, his eyes darting away like he was avoiding mine. It wasn't just surprise I saw, it was something deeper. Guilt? Fear? When I finished, Jack exhaled slowly and rubbed the back of his neck. "Mike, maybe you should talk to her. You don't want to assume the worst. Just, ask her what's going on." His tone sounded forced, almost rehearsed, and it threw me off. This wasn't the solid, dependable Jack I knew. It felt like he was holding something back. Before I could press him further, Mia walked into the room, her cheerful smile breaking the tension. "Mike. What a surprise. Is everything okay?" she asked, her warm demeanor a stark contrast to the knot tightening in my stomach. I forced a weak smile, my mind racing. "Yeah, just catching up with Jack." She nodded, but her gaze flickered between us, as if she sensed the unease hanging in the air. "Well, if you ever need to talk, you know we're here for you." I thanked them and left, but the drive home was a blur of confusion and suspicion. Jack's reaction wasn't what I'd expected. He seemed nervous. Like he knew more than he was letting on. And that's when a chilling thought struck me, what if this wasn't just about Laura? By the time I got home, the house felt eerily quiet. Laura still wasn't back, and the emptiness was suffocating. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, half hoping she'd text me with an explanation, a reason to ease my fears. But the screen stayed dark. The longer I sat there, the more my thoughts spiraled. Memories of our life together flashed through my mind, the good times, the promises, the trust we'd built. Had it all been an illusion? My gut told me there was more to this story, that the late nights and the message from B were just the tip of the iceberg. Desperate for clarity, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went looking for the truth. Her laptop was sitting on the kitchen counter. Laura rarely used it anymore, always glued to her phone instead. But maybe, just maybe, it held something, some clue to explain what was happening. I hesitated as I opened it, guilt bubbling up in my chest. This wasn't who I was. I wasn't the kind of man who went digging through his wife's things. But the need to know outweighed everything else. There was no password, and the screen unlocked with a quiet click. My hands trembled as I clicked around, searching for answers to the questions I was too afraid to ask. I opened Laura's laptop and began scrolling through her emails. At first, it was mostly work-related messages, nothing unusual. Then, I noticed an older thread with Mia, one of her closest friends. Expecting casual chatter about dinner plans or catching up over drinks, I clicked on it. What I found hit me like a freight train. "I don't know what to do, Mia. I think I'm falling for him." I froze. It's not like that with Mike anymore. He's a good guy, but this, it feels different. I'm scared. My breath caught in my chest. Falling for him. Who? Was it B from the text message? Or was this about someone else entirely? My heart raced as I reread the words, hoping I was misinterpreting them. But there was no mistaking her meaning. It wasn't just Laura's words that crushed me, it was the realization that Mia had known. She had been Laura's confidant through all of this, and yet, she never said a word to me. All those times I'd opened up to Mia and Jack about Laura's behavior, confiding in them about how distant she'd been, they stayed quiet. They knew and still said nothing. I shut the laptop, my hands shaking. My mind was spinning, trying to connect the dots. Who was this man Laura was falling for? Was it the mysterious B? I couldn't tell. The betrayal cut deep, but I couldn't stop the questions. I needed to know more. An hour later, Laura walked through the door. She wore her usual bright smile, but it felt different now, too easy, too light. My stomach churned. "Hey, you're still up?" she asked, dropping her purse on the counter. I kept my tone steady, trying not to betray the storm inside me. "Yeah, couldn't sleep." She kissed my cheek, her movements so casual it almost felt mocking, and headed upstairs to the bedroom. I stayed on the couch, frozen in place, replaying the messages over and over in my mind. How could she act so normal when everything was crumbling? I knew I couldn't keep this charade going forever. I needed answers. I needed the truth. But not tonight. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, those messages to Mia echoed in my mind. "I'm falling for him." Her words were like a blade, twisting deeper each time I thought of them. And Mia, how could she keep something like this from me? My thoughts kept drifting back to Jack as well. His evasiveness when I'd confided in him about Laura. Was he hiding something too? Did they both know more than they were letting on? By morning, my determination had solidified. I couldn't live like this, torn between doubt and dread. I needed real answers, proof of what was happening. That's when a desperate idea struck me. I reached out to a friend who worked in IT, someone I could trust to help without asking too many questions. I explained the situation as vaguely as I could and asked if he could recover deleted messages from Laura's phone. He agreed, telling me to send it over and he'd take care of the rest. Laura was in the shower when I made my move. Her phone was on the nightstand, the device she never let out of her sight lately. My hands trembled as I picked it up and slid it into my bag. My heart was pounding so hard I thought she might hear it through the walls. I managed to leave the house without her noticing and dropped the phone off with my friend later that day. The hours that followed felt like a fog. Guilt gnawed at me for invading her privacy, but I couldn't shake the need for clarity. A part of me hoped I was wrong. Maybe there was an innocent explanation for all of this. Maybe Laura wasn't cheating, and I was spiraling over nothing. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't just paranoia. Something was deeply wrong, and I was about to uncover the truth, no matter how much it hurt. But deep down, I already knew. I had known for a while. That night, Laura came home late again. I didn't say much, just pretended I was exhausted and went to bed early. She didn't even notice the missing phone, or if she did, she didn't seem to care. The next day, my friend called. His voice was heavy, hesitant. "It's done," he said. "Are you sure you're ready to see this?" I drove over in silence, my chest tight, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. When I arrived, he handed me a folder containing the recovered messages. For a moment, I couldn't bring myself to open it. It felt like Pandora's box, and I knew that once I looked inside, there would be no going back. Finally, I took a deep breath and flipped it open. And there it was. Message after message between Laura and Jack. "I can't stop thinking about you. Last night was amazing. I don't know how we're going to keep doing this. We have to be more careful. Mike is starting to notice things." My world crumbled. My best friend. The person I trusted more than anyone outside of my wife. It was Jack. It hit me like a truck. Every secret glance, the awkward tension when we all hung out, Mia's overly warm smiles. They'd all known. Laura and Jack had been carrying on an affair right under my nose, and everyone had kept it from me. I felt sick to my stomach. The betrayal hit me from every angle, suffocating me. Laura, my wife, the person I thought I knew better than anyone. And Jack, my best friend, the one I'd always trusted to have my back. Together, they had torn my life apart. I stared at the messages, my vision blurring as the weight of it all crashed down on me. Every excuse she'd made, every late night she blamed on work, it had all been lies. Lies wrapped in smiles and stolen moments. Jack had been there, looking me in the eye, acting like everything was fine while he was sneaking around with my wife. I don't even remember leaving my friend's place. The next thing I knew, I was parked outside Jack's house, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I had no plan, no idea what I was going to do. I just knew I couldn't let this go on without confronting him. I climbed out of the car, marched up to his door, and knocked hard. My heart pounded in my chest, and my mind spun with everything I wanted to say, everything I wanted to scream. When Jack opened the door and saw my face, I could see the realization hit him like a brick. He knew. "Jack," I said, my voice low and trembling with rage. "You've been sleeping with my wife." His face fell, and for a second, he looked panicked. His mouth opened as though to speak, but no words came out. Then, just for an instant, fear flickered across his expression. "Mike, listen," he began, stepping forward with his hands raised defensively. "Don't," I snapped, cutting him off. "Don't even try to explain. I've seen the messages, Jack. I know." He froze, then let out a long, defeated sigh. His shoulders slumped, and he looked away, avoiding my eyes. "I didn't want you to find out like this," he muttered. "Like this?" I shouted, my fists clenched at my sides. "How the hell did you think I was going to find out, Jack? Were you just going to keep sneaking around forever?" He winced, his face crumpling like he couldn't bear the weight of his own guilt. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not supposed to happen." I repeated, my voice rising with each word. "You were cheating with my wife, Jack. My wife. And you're telling me it wasn't supposed to happen? What does that even mean?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, looking pitiful and small. I wanted to hit him, to let all my anger and heartbreak out in one violent swing. But I didn't. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of losing control. I took a step back, trying to steady my breathing. "How long?" I asked, my voice cracking under the weight of the question. Jack hesitated, glancing around like the answer might be written somewhere nearby. "A few months," he finally admitted. The words knocked the air out of me. "Months?" I whispered, the betrayal cutting deeper with each syllable. "How could you do this to me, Jack? You were my best friend. I trusted you." "I know," he said quickly, his voice breaking. "I know, Mike. I screwed up. It's the worst mistake I've ever made." A mistake. That's what he called it. A mistake. Like forgetting to lock a door or losing your wallet. This wasn't a mistake, it was a deliberate betrayal. One they had both chosen, over and over again, tearing apart everything I thought I had with Laura, with Jack, with all of them. And as much as I wanted to scream at him, to hit him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling, all I could do was stand there, staring at the broken man who used to be my friend. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head as anger bubbled up inside me. "You think a simple, sorry, is going to fix this? You're unbelievable, Jack. Absolutely unbelievable." Jack stepped toward me, his hands out like he wanted to bridge the impossible gap between us. "Mike, listen, Don't touch me," I yelled, taking a step back. "You don't get to act like you care. Not after what you've done." He froze, his hands hanging in the air, his face a mix of guilt and desperation. "I'm not making excuses. I swear I'm not. I don't even know how this happened. Laura and I." "Don't you dare say her name," I snapped, the sound of it coming from him like gasoline on a fire. You didn't accidentally have an affair, Jack. You chose this. Both of you. Every time you were together, you made that choice. So don't stand here and tell me it wasn't supposed to happen. He looked away, his shoulders slumping under the weight of his silence. There was nothing he could say, no excuse, no explanation that would make this any less horrific. For a moment, I just stared at him, trying to reconcile this man in front of me with the best friend I thought I knew. The person I'd trusted with my life. What about Mia? I asked suddenly, the realization hitting me like a brick wall. Does she know? Jack winced, his face twisting with shame. She knows something. Not everything. Of course she doesn't, I muttered bitterly. Because you've been lying to her too. Just like you've been lying to me. To everyone. He didn't respond, but his expression told me everything I needed to know. The guilt was eating him alive, but it didn't matter. His regret wouldn't undo the damage. I can't even look at you, I said, my voice breaking under the weight of my anger and heartbreak. I don't know who you are anymore. He flinched at my words, his eyes full of something that might have been pain, but I didn't care. I wasn't there to console him. I'm done, I said finally, turning toward my car. You and Laura. You deserve each other. I walked away before he could say anything else, before he could try to stop me. I wasn't interested in hearing another word. I got in my car and slammed the door shut, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. As I drove off, the full weight of what had happened pressed down on me. Laura. Jack. The two people I had trusted most in the world had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, the streets and buildings blurring together as my mind raced. It didn't feel real. I kept hoping I'd wake up from this nightmare, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the reality of what had happened. Eventually, I parked near the beach, staring out at the waves crashing against the shore. The sound was constant, almost hypnotic, but it did nothing to quiet the storm inside me. My chest ached with betrayal, my thoughts circling back to everything I'd lost. My phone buzzed in my pocket, dragging me back to the moment. For a second, I considered ignoring it, but I pulled it out anyway. It was a text from Laura. Hey, I'll be home in a bit. Can we talk? I stared at the screen, my stomach churning. She didn't know I knew. Not yet. She was probably rehearsing some excuse, some lie to keep me in the dark. For a moment, I thought about calling her, confronting her over the phone. But no. I needed to do this face to face. I needed to see the look on her face when she realized her perfect little world was falling apart. I texted back, yeah, we need to talk. The drive home was agonizing, each mile making my chest tighter. My mind replayed the messages between her and Jack on an endless loop, the whispers, the stolen moments, the lies they thought they could get away with. How long had this been going on? How long had she been smiling at me, kissing me, pretending everything was fine while sneaking around with him? By the time I pulled into the driveway, the tension in me felt ready to explode. I wasn't sure what I'd say to her, or what I'd do, but one thing was certain, the lies were over. When I walked into the house, Laura was already there, sitting at the kitchen table. She looked up as I entered, her face tense, her eyes darting toward mine like she was searching for answers before I could even speak. There was something about her posture, stiff, uneasy, that told me she sensed what was coming but wasn't sure how bad it would be. Hey, she said softly, her voice overly gentle, almost rehearsed. You okay? I dropped my keys on the counter, staring at her. The words I'd practiced in my head on the drive home felt stuck in my throat. My chest burned with anger, betrayal, and heartbreak, but I forced myself to stay composed. You need to tell me the truth, Laura, I said, my voice low, the control barely holding. Right now. Her face went pale. What are you talking about? I took a step closer, my hands clenching at my sides. I know, Laura. I know about you and Jack. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked frozen, like a deer caught in headlights. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, scrambling for something to say, but there was nowhere for her to hide. Mike, she started, her voice trembling. Don't, I cut her off, raising a hand to stop her. Don't you dare try to lie to me. I've seen the messages. I know everything. She dropped her gaze to the table, her hands shaking as they toyed with the edge of her sleeve. For the first time in weeks, she was at a loss for words. The confident, composed Laura I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone who couldn't even look me in the eye. How long? I demanded, my voice cracking under the weight of my anger. How long have you been sneaking around with my best friend behind my back? She flinched, tears welling up in her eyes. 6 months, she whispered, her voice barely audible. 6 months. The words hit me like a physical blow. For half a year, they had lied to me, smiled in my face, and pretended nothing was wrong. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. My chest tightened, my head spun, and the room felt like it was closing in. How could you do this? I choked out, my voice thick with emotion. How could you lie to me like that? I trusted you, Laura. I loved you. That broke her. She started crying, the tears falling freely as her shoulders shook. I never wanted to hurt you, she sobbed. I didn't mean for it to happen. It got out of control. Out of control. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. That's what you're calling it? You didn't mean for it to happen. You mean you accidentally fell into bed with him? Over and over again. She wiped at her face, her sobs intensifying as she struggled to explain. It wasn't like that, she stammered. It wasn't just about the sex, Mike. Don't you dare say you love him, I interrupted, my voice cold, almost a whisper. The words felt like venom in my mouth, and I couldn't bear the thought of hearing them from her lips. She froze, her face crumpling, and more tears spilled down her cheeks. I don't know what I feel anymore, she said, her voice breaking. I'm sorry. I never wanted to lose you. Her words were a dagger straight to my chest. She didn't know what she felt. After everything I had given her, my trust, my loyalty, my life, this was her response. I had built my world around her, and she had torn it apart for a man I once considered a brother. I leaned against the counter, my hands gripping the edge for support, the weight of it all threatening to crush me. You've destroyed everything, I said quietly, my voice filled with pain. Everything we built. For what? For him. She sobbed harder, her hands covering her face, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. Not after this. Not when she had already ripped my heart out. You already lost me, Laura, I said quietly, my voice hollow, drained of emotion. The moment you decided to lie, to cheat, you lost me. For the first time, I saw a real panic flash in her eyes. She reached out, desperate to close the gap between us, but I stepped back, refusing to let her touch me. Not after everything she'd done. Mike, please, she begged, her voice cracking under the weight of her sobs. We can fix this. We can work through it. I love you. I swear I do. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. You don't know what love is. The words hung in the air like a final nail in the coffin. Laura collapsed into the chair behind her, her cries echoing in the silence of the house. But I didn't feel anything. No pity, no anger, no sorrow. I was empty, hollowed out by the betrayal. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, out of the house, away from her. There was nothing left to say. A week passed after that confrontation, and it felt like I was living in a fog. The days blurred together, a mix of anger, disbelief, and an overwhelming sadness that clung to me like a heavy weight. Laura had moved into a hotel, leaving the house eerily quiet and cold. We hadn't spoken since that night. One morning, my phone buzzed, and my stomach tightened when I saw Jack's name flash across the screen. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something compelled me to answer. Maybe it was anger, maybe curiosity, or maybe I just wanted to hear him admit how much of a coward he was. "What do you want, Jack?" I said, my voice sharp, barely concealing my rage. I needed to tell you something," he said, his voice small, like he was struggling to hold himself together. "Mia knows." I told her everything. I sat up, my surprise tempered with cynicism. Mia had always seemed like she knew more than she let on, but I hadn't expected Jack to come clean voluntarily. "And?" I asked flatly. "What now?" "She forgave me," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know how, but she did." I told her everything, how it started, what happened. "I thought she'd leave me, but she didn't. She said she wants to work through it." My stomach churned at his words. Forgiveness? After what he'd done? I couldn't wrap my head around it. But then again, everyone processes betrayal differently. Still, I couldn't suppress the sharp pang of disgust that crept up inside me. "And what about Laura?" I asked, my tone icy. Jack hesitated. "I ended it," he said after a moment. "I told her it's over. I need to focus on fixing things with Mia." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "So that's it? You've decided you're done with her now that you've been caught? Just like that?" "It's not like that," he said weakly. "I made a mistake. A huge mistake. I never should have let it get this far." "But you did," I snapped, my anger boiling over. "You both did." He let out a heavy sigh. "I'm sorry, Mike. For everything. I know that doesn't mean much now, but I truly am." "Yeah, well, sorry doesn't undo the damage, does it?" Before he could respond, I ended the call, cutting off whatever pathetic excuse or apology he was about to offer. Laura had lost everything, her lover had turned his back on her, just as she had on me. A part of me felt a grim sense of satisfaction at the thought, but another part of me felt nothing. Just an emptiness that refused to be filled. After that call, I realized I couldn't keep carrying this weight alone. I found a therapist, Dr. Harris. At first, the sessions felt awkward, like I was spilling my darkest thoughts to a stranger who couldn't possibly understand. But slowly, bit by bit, the pieces started falling into place. Dr. Harris didn't sugarcoat things. He didn't try to convince me that everything would be fine or that I needed to forgive Laura and Jack. Instead, he helped me process the reality of what had happened. "It's not about excusing what they did," he said in one session. "It's about letting go of the power their actions have over you. You can't control them. You can only control how you move forward." That resonated with me. For months, I'd let their betrayal consume me, but through therapy, I started finding a way to breathe again. To imagine a future not defined by their lies. Meanwhile, Laura's life was unraveling. Jack had ended things, and without me, she had nowhere to turn. After the divorce, she had to move out of the house, the home we'd built together. She begged me for more time, for another chance to get back on her feet, but I couldn't. Not after everything. The house was filled with too many memories, good ones turned bitter, and I needed to move on. Her reputation at work took a hit once rumors of the affair started circulating. With no family nearby and few friends willing to take her in, she was left scrambling. For a while, she stayed with a friend, but that arrangement didn't last. One evening, I got a text from her. "I'm sorry for everything. I don't know what to do anymore. I have nowhere to go. Please, Mike, help me." I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. Part of me wanted to help her, to be the guy who always cleaned up the mess. But the person I was becoming, the one I'd fought to rebuild through therapy, knew that wasn't my responsibility anymore. I didn't respond. She made her choices, and now she had to live with them. The divorce left her with almost nothing. She lost the house, her lover, and her stability. She was drowning in the mess she'd created. And for the first time, I felt something like peace. Not happiness. Not joy. But a quiet acceptance. This chapter of my life was over. Laura had destroyed everything, and now she was left to pick up the pieces alone. And me? I was moving on.